The smell of barbecue still hung in the warm summer air when my mother-in-law set down her glass of iced tea and smiled across the picnic table. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile she wore whenever she wanted an audience. Nearly 24 people filled her backyard, neighbors, church friends, cousins, and relatives balancing paper plates piled high with food I had spent the entire morning preparing. The laughter slowly faded as everyone sensed Pauline was about to say something. She looked directly at me. "You know," she said with a soft laugh, "if you disappeared tomorrow, I honestly don't think anyone here would even notice." For one heartbeat, the yard became completely silent. Then the laughter started. My husband's sister nearly spilled her drink. Uncle Carl slapped the table. Even 2 women from church laughed awkwardly because everyone else was laughing. I looked toward my husband, Ethan. He lowered his eyes to his plate. Not a word. Not even, "Mom, that's enough." I picked up my hot dog, took one slow bite, and met Pauline's eyes. "We'll find out," I said quietly. Nobody paid attention. Within seconds, they were talking about football scores and vacation plans as if nothing had happened. But I had already made my decision. 48 hours later, every person sitting at that table would understand exactly what I meant. My name is Myra. I'm 32 years old, and for 3 years I believed that earning love was simply a matter of working hard enough. I was wrong. After losing both of my parents in my 20s, I had no close relatives left. I taught myself graphic design using free online lessons, picked up small freelance jobs around my hometown, and eventually built a stable living, one client at a time. Then I met Ethan. He was patient, funny, easy to talk to. When he asked me to marry him, I thought I wasn't just gaining a husband, I thought I was finally gaining a family. Instead, I walked straight into a house where I would spend years proving my worth to people who had already decided I would never belong. Pauline ruled the family like a queen without a crown. Every month she hosted a large backyard cookout that everyone treated like a sacred tradition. To outsiders, it looked wonderful. To me, it was unpaid labor disguised as family bonding. Every Friday night, I marinated meat, prepared salads, baked desserts, chopped vegetables, packed coolers, and loaded everything into the truck before sunrise. By the time guests arrived Saturday afternoon, the tables were decorated, the food was hot, and every detail was perfect. Then Pauline accepted every compliment. "This potato salad is incredible." "Oh, thank you. I've been making it for years." The recipe had belonged to my grandmother. But correcting Pauline only created another argument, so I stayed quiet, again and again and again. It wasn't just the food. I designed flyers for family events. I managed Ethan's repair shop website. I organized paperwork, handled invoices, answered customer emails. Whenever anyone praised the business, Ethan smiled proudly as if he'd done everything himself. He never lied. He simply never told the truth. The hardest part wasn't Pauline. It was Ethan's silence. Whenever I tried explaining how his mother's comments hurt me, he always gave the same answer. "She doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she jokes. Please don't make this into a bigger problem." Every conversation ended exactly the same. Nothing changed. His younger sister, Brittany, made sure I knew exactly where I ranked. She called me the hired help. She deliberately spilled barbecue sauce across my laptop bag and laughed while I cleaned it. Their uncle joked that my only talent was carrying serving trays. Everyone laughed, including Ethan. I kept telling myself things would improve, that once they really got to know me, they'd accept me. Instead, every month became another reminder that I was useful but never valued. The strange thing was that I had already started preparing for the possibility of leaving.
quietly, without telling anyone. Every paycheck, I transferred a little money into a private savings account. Nothing dramatic. Just enough that if the day ever came, I wouldn't be trapped. At first, it was a safety net. Then it became an escape plan. Still, I couldn't bring myself to leave, because walking away meant admitting I truly had nowhere else to go. Until the July cookout. That morning looked like every other one. I spent hours cooking, loaded the truck, arranged flowers on the tables, checked every serving dish twice. By early afternoon, 23 guests filled Pauline's backyard. People devoured the ribs. The cornbread disappeared first. Children ran through the yard while adults complimented the food. As always, Pauline accepted every compliment with a gracious smile. Then someone started talking about family traditions. Pauline leaned back in her chair. "Family is everything," she announced proudly. Everyone nodded. Then she turned toward me. "Of course," she added sweetly, "blood is what really matters." Her eyes locked onto mine. If you vanished tomorrow, nobody would miss you." This time the laughter sounded louder than ever. I looked around the table. Every face blurred together. Some laughed because they thought it was funny. Some laughed because everyone else did. One person didn't laugh. Ethan. He simply stared at his plate. That somehow hurt even more. I picked up my hot dog, took one slow bite, swallowed. Then I smiled. "We'll see." Nobody understood what those 3 words meant, but I did. Because while everyone else enjoyed dessert, I was quietly saying goodbye. By the time the sun rose 2 mornings later, I would already be gone. The house was completely silent when I carried my suitcase to the front door. Ethan was asleep on the couch, the television still glowing in the corner of the living room. For a long moment, I simply stood there and looked at him. 3 years. 3 years of excuses. 3 years of hearing, "She doesn't mean it." 3 years of waiting for a husband who never once chose me over keeping the peace. I quietly slipped my wedding ring off and placed it on the kitchen counter. No note, no speech, no final argument. I'd already spent 3 years explaining how I felt. If he hadn't listened by now, another letter wouldn't change anything. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I loaded my suitcase into my car and drove away. As the town disappeared in my rearview mirror, I pulled into a gas station, blocked every member of the family on my phone, and whispered the same 2 words I'd spoken at the cookout. "We'll see." The first night was harder than I had imagined. I checked into a small roadside motel nearly 3 hours away. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and fresh paint. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase I'd packed in less than 20 minutes. For the first time since leaving, reality settled over me. I had no husband, no family, no home waiting for me. Only a laptop, a savings account, and enough money to survive for a few months if I was careful. I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I missed Pauline, not because I missed Ethan. I cried because I wished my parents were still alive. My mother would have hugged me and told me I should have left much sooner. When the tears finally stopped, I opened my laptop. If I was going to rebuild my life, it would start now. By sunrise, I contacted landlords in Asheville, updated my freelance portfolio, and filed the paperwork to begin the divorce process. It felt terrifying, but for the first time in years, every decision belonged to me. 2 weeks later, I unlocked the door to a tiny studio apartment over an old neighborhood print shop. The place wasn't fancy. The floors creaked, the windows rattled whenever trucks drove past. The kitchen barely had enough room for one person, but it was mine. Downstairs, the owner of the print shop introduced herself as Gwen. She didn't ask uncomfortable questions. She didn't want to know why I'd moved. She simply poured me a cup of coffee and said, "If you ever need anything, my door is open." Those words meant more than she could have known. No judgment, no conditions, just kindness. Something I'd almost forgotten existed. The next few months became the busiest of my life. Every morning I walked through town introducing myself to small business owners, restaurants, bookstores, coffee shops, local boutiques. Most politely declined.
A few promised to call someday. Then one did. A small hotel hired me to redesign its logo and website. That project led to another, then another. Within a few months, I had more clients than I'd expected. For the first time, people appreciated my work without someone else taking the credit. They thanked me, recommended me, paid me fairly. I slowly stopped introducing myself as someone's wife. I became simply Myra. Back in my old town, things weren't going nearly as smoothly. A former coworker quietly sent me a message one afternoon. "I thought you should know." Apparently, the monthly cookout had gone ahead without me. Pauline insisted she could handle everything herself. She couldn't. The chicken burned, the potato salad was bland, half the guests left early. Several families never came back. A week later, Ethan's repair shop website crashed. He called the hosting company. They couldn't help. The account had been registered under my email address. Without me, he couldn't even access it. He hired someone else to rebuild it. The replacement never worked properly. Customers started going elsewhere. The business slowly began losing money. I read the messages, thanked my friend, and closed my phone. Not because I didn't care, because for the first time, their problems were no longer mine. Months passed. One afternoon, another package arrived. It contained the last box of personal belongings I'd left behind. Inside were a few clothes, some books, and an empty space where my mother's keepsakes should have been. Her handwritten recipes, her favorite bracelet, an old family photograph, all gone. Lying on top of the box was a yellow sticky note, only 5 words. "You never deserved them." Pauline's handwriting. I stared at that note for several minutes. Oddly enough, I didn't cry. Instead, I folded it carefully and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because I never wanted to forget why I left. That same afternoon, I made another decision. I registered my business under my maiden name, Harper Creative. The name on the sign wasn't my married name anymore. It belonged to my mother, to the family who loved me without conditions. When the new sign was finally installed outside my small office, I stood across the street and smiled. For years, I'd spent my life helping someone else's family succeed. Now, every hour I worked was building something that finally belonged to me. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the family who laughed when Pauline said nobody would miss me was slowly discovering an uncomfortable truth. They hadn't lost a guest. They had lost the person quietly holding everything together, and they were only beginning to understand what my disappearance had really cost them. 9 months after I disappeared, I almost stopped looking over my shoulder. My little design studio had become everything I once dreamed of. Regular clients, steady income, neighbors who greeted me by name, friends who celebrated my victories instead of competing with them. For the first time since losing my parents, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the bell above my studio door chimed. I looked up from my computer. Standing in the doorway was Ethan. For a second, I barely recognized him. He had lost weight. Dark circles framed his eyes. His shoulders sagged beneath a wrinkled shirt that looked like he slept in it. He looked older than 9 months. He looked tired. "Myra," he said quietly. I stood but didn't invite him inside. "What are you doing here?" It took me hours to find this place. I didn't ask how.
Silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. I was wrong. Those 3 words would have meant everything a year ago. Now they felt strangely small. I should have defended you. I should have stopped Mom. I should have listened. His voice cracked. I thought keeping everyone happy was protecting my family. I folded my arms. And when exactly did you realize your family included me? He lowered his eyes. After you were gone. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Ethan. He looked up. You took losing me before you noticed I was carrying everything. He took a hesitant step forward. Come home. I almost smiled. Home? The house is gone. The business is struggling. Mom knows she was wrong. I looked at him carefully.
Did she apologize? His silence answered before his mouth did. I thought maybe, eventually. I walked over to my desk and opened the top drawer. Inside lay a large envelope. I handed it to him. He stared at the finalized divorce papers. His hands trembled. You already signed them? Months ago. Another long silence filled the room. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believe you, but some apologies arrive after they've stopped changing anything. He nodded slowly. Without another word, he turned and walked out. The little bell above the door rang one last time. This time, I didn't cry after he left. I simply went back to work. A few weeks later, the Asheville Arts Council invited me to design the branding for their annual fundraising gala. It was the biggest project of my career. Programs, stage graphics, invitations, banners, everything. When the director asked if I would also give a short speech during the event, I almost laughed. Speaking in front of hundreds of people terrified me. But then I remembered another room full of people, a backyard, a picnic table, 23 laughing faces. I accepted. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. More than 100 guests filled the room. Business owners, artists, community leaders. My designs decorated every wall. For a moment, I simply stood backstage, taking it all in. Less than a year earlier, I'd been told nobody would miss me. Now, strangers had gathered to celebrate work I had created. When my name was announced, applause echoed across the room. I stepped to the microphone. My hands shook. Then I smiled. A year ago, I began, someone told me that if I disappeared, nobody would notice. A few guests exchanged curious glances. I believed something different. I believed disappearing wasn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of finding the people who truly see you. The room grew completely still. I didn't rebuild my life to prove someone else wrong. I rebuilt it to prove to myself that my value never depended on their approval. The applause that followed felt warmer than I could have imagined. Then I noticed movement near the back doors. Pauline, and just behind her, Ethan. She had actually come. She marched across the ballroom without hesitation. People instinctively stepped aside. You think you've won? She demanded loudly. You abandoned this family. Several nearby conversations stopped. I remained calm. I didn't abandon anyone. I left a place where I wasn't respected. Pauline's face flushed. It was a joke. You destroyed my son's life over one joke. I met her eyes. It wasn't one joke. It was 3 years. The room had gone completely silent. Every guest was watching. Pauline pointed toward me. We treated you like family. I shook my head. No, you treated me like free labor. You accepted my work, you accepted my kindness, but you never accepted me. Her voice rose even louder. You should have stayed and worked things out. I smiled gently. I tried. For 3 years. You told me nobody would miss me if I disappeared. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I took one slow step closer. Yet here you are.
You drove hours just to find me. I paused. So tell me, if nobody missed me, why are you here? The silence was absolute. Every answer she had prepared vanished. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nothing to say. The event director quietly stepped between us. "Ma'am," he said politely, "I'm going to ask you to leave." Pauline looked around the ballroom. No one supported her. No one defended her. No one applauded her performance. She turned without another word and walked toward the exit. Ethan hesitated. "I'm sorry," he said one final time. I nodded. "I know." Then they were gone. 2 months later, the divorce became official. I signed my maiden name with steady hands, Harper. It felt like closing one chapter and opening another. Back in my hometown, life continued. The family cookouts quietly disappeared. The repair shop was eventually sold. Everyone moved on in different directions. Not because I destroyed the family, because the foundation had never been as strong as they believed. I had simply been holding the cracks together. The following spring, I invited a few close friends to a rooftop barbecue overlooking the mountains. There were no speeches, no insults, no competition. Everyone brought something to share. Nobody cared who received the compliments. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I picked up a hot dog, added mustard, and took one slow bite. The memory of that backyard flashed through my mind. Same food, different table, same woman, different life. I finally understood something I wished I'd known earlier. The people who insist you'll never be missed are often the ones who notice your absence the most, because sometimes the quietest goodbye leaves the loudest echo.